We have over 220 unique companies that are attending today, about 180 of which are VC-backed startups representing about $60 billion in investing. We have another 40 or so public enterprises attending today representing about 16 trillion in market cap. So really just kind of a one-of-a-kind gathering of category-leading companies and engineering talent under one roof. And look, the plan today is to have fun. So we just had some lunch up on the roof. We're gonna have some drinks later. We're gonna get to know each other. We're gonna break bread. We've got some amazing speakers in store for you. But before we get into that, I'm just gonna spend a few minutes talking about some of the key themes for this year's summit and some of the trends that we're tracking heading into 2025 and beyond. So the first thing I wanted to start off, it's a little bit cliche, but I just kind of wanted to do a roll up for everybody for the last 12 months since we spoke with you, what's gone on particularly at the foundational model layer. Lots of interesting things. I think one, there's just been an incredible number of new models that have come out. Seemingly, every week there's a new kind of major release that comes out. It's kind of interesting just how quickly and how often it is that we just these things become matter of fact. And it's like model releases that, even a year ago would have been the biggest news suddenly, are yesterday's news or a day after they're announced. It's like we don't even talk about them anymore. So just a lot of interesting things happening, lots of new models. Models are getting smarter, they're getting bigger. At the same time, the foundational labs are finding ways to still kind of confuse us with their naming conventions. If you go to LM Arena today and look at the #1 text model that's listed on the site, it's something called Gemini-2.5-Pro-Preview-06-05. So super catchy title, don't get me wrong. But something that we think will eventually be streamlined and that the model labs will come up with a better way of kind of naming these things. But for now, we're left with this sort of word cloud and these Easter egg kind of features that are embedded into each of the different model services. Prices have gone down. So, OpenAI's O3 model was launched just this last April. And then just this week, they announced an 80% price drop. And we're really seeing that across the board, across all the major model families. And it's really hard to believe, but just in the last 6 months even was when these deep learning or deep research models came online. And the work had been obviously going on for years, but really it started with DeepSeek. They kind of showed that a small but mighty team can deliver something that's near state of the art. They introduced this idea of these new sort of scaling laws and thinking about inference time compute. And they also kind of pushed the foundational labs to release their own reasoning models. And now pretty much everybody under the sun has their own version of sort of a DeepSeek style model. The models got larger windows, so there's larger context sizes, so we're up to like tens of millions of context lengths. The models were given memory, which led to some humorous tweets and Reddit posts following OpenAI's GPT-4o launch, where the model was exhibiting some really sort of sycophantic behavior, and they had to sort of walk that back and change some of the behavior and capabilities there. The models got much better at instruction following and tool use. And that's really kind of the segue to today. That's really what's going to be kind of grounding a lot of the sessions today. There's a whole new slew of agent frameworks that have kind of emerged off the back of this work that the foundational labs have done. There's new tools that are purpose-built for agents that are coming out. There's new protocols like Anthropic's MCP that we'll hear about later, and Google A2A and others that are really kind of opening up the doors to this new frontier of agent development. One of the first areas we've really seen agents take off is in software development. And I think the notable thing to me here is just in the last year, there's been a huge vibe shift where if we asked, if we polled the audience last year, I think it was still pretty mixed where people would say, I'm experimenting with these tools. They provide some amount of value, but the ceiling is still maybe a little bit low, or it's not quite there. I'm still trying to understand whether there's enough here in terms of capabilities. Now the paradigm has shifted pretty substantially, and it started with like 3.5 from Claude being launched last year. But the conversation has totally shifted from a question of, is there enough capability here to, are my teams doing enough to take advantage of the capabilities that these models are providing? And how am I doing as a leader, you all as engineering leaders, to embed these things into my team to have them be part of our standard development process? There's 4 different sort of AI for code modalities that we're tracking. I think at least 3 of them are pretty matter of fact. There's sort of the IDE tools. Everyone's kind of probably familiar with Cursor and Windsurf. You've got the CLI tools coming online like Claude Code. You've got these new vibe coding platforms like Replit and Lovable and others that are aiming to sort of democratize code development for the masses. And then you've got these really kind of bleeding edge autonomous agent systems, things like Cognition or Devin from Cognition, Others like Factory we've got up there, Cosine and others that are kind of doing really interesting things, sort of the bleeding edge of what's possible with building these autonomous agents that can go and perform tasks that span minutes, hours, even days, and perform kind of autonomously without very much or any human intervention. And we have some folks from the cognition team coming in a little bit to talk about some of the state of the art there. And the advent of these tools is really shifting what it even means to be an engineer in 2025. And there's a lot of like fundamental kind of existential questions that they raise about how do we think about engineering? How do we think about evaluating our teams? And we've stolen this chart from our friends at DX, but it's a pretty good sort of list of kind of key KPIs and things that you want to think about and track as an engineering leader. I think if I could summarize what we're seeing, it's kind of a few things. It's people that are baselining, so looking at like the traditional throughput metrics, quality metrics, et cetera, comparing that sort of before these tools came online and then after. People that are looking at the efficiency of the tools themselves. So how much code is this particular AI tool generating? How many hours is it saving me, et cetera? And then also thinking about new KPIs. Like I talked earlier about this vibe shift towards trying to encourage your teams to use these tools more and more. So are there KPIs that you can use to sort of game the system in a way in order to encourage your developers to take even more advantage and spend more time getting familiar with these platforms? There's also a bunch of unsolved stuff here. And so again, I mentioned DX. We're going to have Abby up a little bit later to talk about some of the research into this space. But if you think about like measuring the contribution of a single individual contributor in this age where we move from hands on keyboard to orchestrating agents, like how do you measure the impact of an individual on your team and what they're up to day to day? And so lots of kind of new stuff there, new kind of paradigms to unlock and interesting research, and Abby's going to touch on that. I think the one thing I'd say that is clear is we're really trending towards this like fully autonomous closed loop application development system. We've had all these sort of primitives here. I think AI for code steals a lot of the attention, but suffice it to say across every phase of the sort of traditional DevOps SDLC, we see AI being applied across like testing and monitoring, observability, et cetera, release management. And we feel like we now have all the necessary ingredients, all the sort of foundational components to build this fully autonomous system, something that can ingest requirements written in natural language, auto-generate code off the back of those, continuously test and scan that code, measure its adoption, usage, and production, infer new requirements, new features that you might need based on the way that users are interacting with the application, automatically deploy those, like run those, test those, code those, deploy those. So super interesting time. We think we're kind of right on the cusp of this new style of autonomous development system. But at the same time, most of what I'm describing here is through the lens of like traditional software development. And so, these are more deterministic systems, like more traditional applications. And when we think about like, how does this apply to agents? Like, how are we applying this concept to agents? What even is an agent? And I think Andrew is here. Andrew Ng has a really great sort of perspective on this, which is not to sort of worry about defining, like coming up with the sort of best definition of what is like truly an agent, but to think of this more as an adjective, this concept of agentic being an adjective, and that applications sit across the spectrum. And we think of the spectrum as sort of, on the one end is sort of like workflows, where you have these predefined sort of hard-coded pathways that are expressed in code that hand off very discrete tasks to LLMs at certain points. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have these more autonomous systems that, in response to a goal or a given sort of question or objective, are able to kind of blaze their own path and figure out the right steps and tasks that are necessary to accomplish that thing. And so I think the state of just the reality today is workflows give us much more predictability, but we think a more future-proof architecture and something that everyone will sort of pivot to over time is more of this autonomous-based system. I think the reason we feel that way is because putting an LLM at sort of like the center, or a generative model, any sort of AI model at the center, is sort of like the brains of your application, allows your app to scale dynamically as the foundational models improve. So if that's sort of your front door to your application and GPT-4 becomes GPT-5, GPT-6, your application stands to benefit and sort of improve over time through that model. And we think that in the not too distant future, everything from the initial GET request to your landing page, the process of responding to that request, serving up your website, the subsequent steps required to think about like what is specific to this user, what sort of hyper-personalized experience can we give them, is all going to be sort of powered by some sort of AI or LLM brain at the core. This is my last kind of tee-up slide. It's just to say that this to us is sort of the future of application development. So this is just to say there's a bunch of common patterns for building these agents. We're going to dive more into this. We're going to have the Anthropic team come, the applied AI team from Anthropic come and talk about some of the things they're seeing in the wild. I think the one overarching sentiment here is what we hear a lot from builders is like, don't overcomplicate things. Again, something that we've heard Andrew talk about is just, sometimes the most simple approaches can be the best one, like a simple sort of RAG, basic sort of data retrieval architecture might be suitable for a lot of use cases, so don't sort of overcomplicate. So this is, to us, the future of software engineering, essentially. And when you think about the teams that are coming in, the sort of junior engineers that you're bringing up in your organizations, this is the kind of stack that they're going to become experts on. The sort of future of application development is going to be more about how do we sort of wrangle the models and get them to perform certain tasks in a way that's reliable and predictable while granting them this autonomy and sort of like shifting towards that end of the spectrum that I just talked about. And what's interesting is like that whole DevOps landscape, that whole sort of chart that I just showed, kind of gets distilled down into just one of the boxes on this page. And it becomes a tool that agents can use to write deterministic code to perform some specific task, in addition to many other tools that they can leverage to do, data retrieval, web search, whatever it is. So anyway, lots of interesting stuff in this space. I think, we're super excited about all the new kind of picks and shovels that are popping up here around like routing and eval tools and monitoring tools and orchestration frameworks. For us as investors, it's exciting because there's just a lot of new things for us to look at. I think for you all, it's a lot to kind of handle and a lot to wrangle. And so again, we're going to spend a lot of time today talking about these different layers of this stack and sort of giving you some interesting nuggets. So that's really it. These are the kind of 4 overarching themes that I just touched on. Again, super excited to have you all today. I think the one thing I would say is, it's still so early. We talk about this stuff so often. In some ways, it can kind of feel like old hat, but a lot of this agent building stuff is still very much in its infancy. And so, there's a lot to unpack, and we really believe in this concept of like the community coming together to talk about these things, to share best practices, to all learn from one another. We have our engineering excellence function. It's kind of put together for this specific purpose. It acts as a dedicated enabler to our engineering community, which is really represented by all of you. And again, so first, full circle to today, we've got an amazing speaker lineup. So very humbled to be joined by a lot of kind of amazing folks that we're going to have joining you in a second. Thank you all for making it out today for our 4th annual, and appreciate your attendance.